Hi everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of Dev Show. Why this is a special? Because we are joining our forces with NG Copenhagen as well. This is a topic that both people at Dev Show and NG Copenhagen love it. My name is Sherry List, and I'm your host today together with good colleague of mine, Rasmus Jack. Hi Rasmus, how are you doing today on this very snowy day?
Yeah. Hi, Sherry. I'm good. It's winter break in Denmark, so I'm in my vacation house. So also apologize for bad internet connection if that should happen. I'm breaking up maybe, but everything is good here. So what about yourself?
I'm also fine. I'm counting down actually to go out and play with the snow. Have you built any snowman yet?
Not personally. Have been out playing with the snow a bit earlier today, but maybe the kids is outside building a snowman. Analog fun, right?
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah, that's fun. So, let's just start actually because I'm very excited about this topic today. So maybe
Mhm.
you can tell us that what are we going to cover today?
Yeah, so you said it was a special episode, and I completely agree, both in terms of topics and also bringing the communities together. So today we're going to learn about the microfrontends. So Natalia is going to talk about some valid use cases for trendy architecture solution. So I like that. So, but in this talk, I'm not going to go into details, but she's much better at that. So, but we're going to learn about microfrontends, microservices, talk about the problems they attempt at solving and what patterns everybody can use to be successful in implementing them. So that's what we're going to learn today.
Yes, I can't wait. But before we bring Natalia on the stage, I want to remind you all that you all can ask a question from Natalia. I'm pretty sure that she's happy to answer them all. We're going to highlight it to her at the end of the show. And also during the show, I'm going to highlight some links on the screen and also on the chat. One is for our feedback form. We really need to have your feedback, and the other one is that how to get your winter learner as your heroes. We are going to talk about this at the end of the show, but just a heads up. And in the chat, you can also talk to each other. You can also talk about maybe what is the approach that you're taking when you're making the front end. We want to hear that as well. But thank you, Rasmus. But I also want to mention you that I really want you to familiarize yourself with our code of conduct, which is highlighted to our meetup page. But long story short, we just want you to be mindful and kind to each other. So let's bring Natalia to the stage, Rasmus.
Yeah, definitely. Welcome, Natalia, and welcome to the Dev Show.
Thank you very
Hi,
much. I am very
Natalia.
excited to be here with you and Sherry and with the
How are you
audience as well.
doing? Is there any snow in Spain?
No, it's sunny today, but people
Mm.
shouldn't think that Barcelona is a sunny place all the time because it's not. It rains a lot, especially in winter. But today, particularly, it's sunny, and I think it's about 14 degrees or 13 degrees. So it's quite cool. Yeah.
Good. I miss a little bit though. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds very good. So welcome to Dev Show, and we can see and we also know that you work as a principal solution architect at NetCentric. So what do you
That's
do there?
right. Well, I design solutions. I'm particularly focused in the front end, but I go all the way to the cloud and integrating APIs and making sure that the runtime is performant. And yes, and that our users or our clients and their users get the best experience out of the front end as a whole, from end to end.
perfect. And I know that you are a GDE, not only one, two times, Web and Angular. Maybe can you tell to the audience that what does it mean to be a GDE and how a person can become a GDE?
Well, the Google Developer Expert Program is it's a program that gives the opportunity to experts in certain fields to reach out to the community. So it enables you, it supports you while you try to share knowledge with a larger audience. So it's all about sharing what you know with others and help them become better developers and attain their goals as such.
And I know that you do that very well. I
Thank you
follow
very much.
all your content and everything that you're sharing all the time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I am also an
And one more
inclusive
thing,
leader.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm also an
Go
inclusive
ahead.
leader, an Azure hero.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And and you're doing that very well. I guess Rasmus has a question for that part as well.
Yeah, and definitely. So one more thing you're doing in the community is also your Women Tech Makers Organizer. So also very interesting and good topic. So what do you do in that area?
Well, we organize the International Women's Day. This year it's going to be online. Last year it had to be online as well. But we try to give also a safe outlet, a safe place for women to become speakers, to become part of the community at that level. And it's very important to me. I really believe that we should do a lot in that area to make sure that the gap is filled and we have more women in technologies.
Yeah,
Definitely
I
agree.
know this is I know this is a very, very kind of dear topic to your heart. I know it very well. And the other thing that I really admire about you is that you also very bold about accessibility as well. So all of this combination together, that's why you are the inclusive leader. And thanks for doing that. Actually,
thank you very much.
But you are also part of another initiative. You are an Auth0 ambassador as well.
That's correct. Yes, because security is a very important topic and everyone should be aware of best practices to make sure their applications are safe and they are not easily hackable. And and users can protect their data, their identity. And this is why I also represent Auth0 as an ambassador.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. I mean, hashtag kudos. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Definitely. A lot of great things and a lot of great things in the community. So should we go into the topic of the day and just leave the stage to you, Natalia? And remember everybody in the audience, put your questions for Natalia in the chat and we will ask them for her at the end. Take it away, Natalia.
Thank you very much. So yes, I think we have discussed me a lot already, but I think I can tell you a bit more because 20 years ago I was a designer and I actually started to be a buildings architect for a while, but then I got acquainted with graphic design and computer graphics in general, and my path changed. And later on, I became a web designer and finally transitioned to developer. And now I work as a solutions architect. So now I'm really obsessed with the universe, and maybe next thing it will be I will become an astronaut, who knows? But I'm not here today to talk to you about space or about me. I am here today to talk to you about patterns, about architecture, and even about methodologies. And there is a methodology I really want to talk to you about to begin with. And that is, okay. Is it showing? I think, guys, there is something. Oh, there it is. Oh, I was scared that it got stuck. No, it's a hype-driven development. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Something new comes out and everyone wants it in their stack. But we need to be cautious because we really need to understand the pros and the cons before we jump in the wagon of any new technology. For every trendy new pattern or technology, there is innovation. Obviously, there are pros, but there are downsides and trade-offs as well. And we have to learn to evaluate really if a solution is good for us, if it's good for our clients, before we get too hyped up like this little guy here. So basically, the patterns I want to talk about to you are the micros, the microservices and the microfrontends as the front-end equivalent. And let's see how we ended up there first. You probably have heard this word around a lot recently, and you're wondering if that is the right solution for you. I don't have that answer because every solution has a use case, and you shouldn't try to find a problem, or you shouldn't have to like a technology and then find the problem so you can use it. Whether an architecture pattern serves or not the purpose, it depends on the problem and a lot of other parameters as well. So let's try to shed some light, but think that it's very subjective and you have to evaluate your case or on a per case basis. This is what we know as a layered architecture, basically an accurate representation of the layers of most applications of medium to large complexity, particularly those with a bunch of stakeholders behind it and more than one cross-functional team working on it. Just remember that the title of this talk is Valid Use Cases for Microfrontends. If you're working all alone or you're working in a small app with a dozen components, maximum, it probably does not make sense for you to have microfrontends at all. There may be a use case where it does, but in general, potentially not. But anyway, back to our layered architecture. When the code base and infrastructure that represents it becomes too massive, we usually know it by the name of monolith. And it is a monolith because it's tightly coupled, because it's large, because it's complex, because it has many interdependencies. And because of that, a lot of people are super quick to judge it and to say that it's bad and evil, but it's not necessarily the case. As long as you have good modularization strategy, both in the backend and the frontend, like for example, you can see here, the frontend code is nicely organized in this picture with each set of frontend code, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript mapping to a component or module. So each one of those pages, let's say, could be a representation of a component. It can help you really simplify things and make your code more maintainable. And we have been doing modularization for several years already, and I think we do it pretty good. And by keeping all your code together in this monolith, you have advantages like having to maintain and configure one single build system and process and a unique release cycle. Also, in terms of front-end build strategies, by splitting code into chunks, we can improve our runtime performance by categorizing it and inlining or requesting front-end assets at page load, while we defer or load asynchronously everything that is below the fold. So in this picture, you can see whatever is highlighted in yellow is below the fold. So it's going to be requested only asynchronously, while everything that is on the critical path becomes asynchronous or even inline request. And from having a single build, you also have additional opportunities. You can keep your dependencies in check, and you can implement techniques for code optimization and performance. Like you can, for example, leveraging to the maximum the common assets and resources, and you can do code splitting, and you can do tree shaking. And there are other advantages. For example, at the time of implementing E2E testing, if you have all your code together, it is much easier to implement an end-to-end testing strategy or do integration testing, or even if you do functional testing, it's much easier if you have it all in the same package, right? So what you can see here is a kind of representation of what happens during the build process in terms of tree shaking and extracting all commonalities to, I don't know, a vendor file, and all the unused named exports are being eliminated because nobody's using them and stuff like this. And then the target or the distribution folder, the code, the kilobytes, is going to be a lot less than it was in the source, because many things are simply not being used. And that you can only do if you are using the same build process for the whole source, right? So we can also decouple dependencies, and we can package them into libraries and consume them from a public registry like NPM, for example. And that's also a valid way of decentralizing and perhaps assigning some code to some specific team to develop and maintain if we feel that we have too much in our monolith and we want to extract some stuff. Like, for example, you can package all your style abstracts as an independent package, and all your JavaScript helper functions, your, component loader, you can all move it away. And because it's going to be used by many components in your application, you can have it in a central place for everyone to use as a dependency. Of course, when you have a very aggressive abstraction like this and you consume common dependencies very heavily, tree shaking, like we said before, is no longer an option, but it's a necessity. And ever since Webpack 4, we have the ability to flag our modules when they are pure, and they can be safely pruned, meaning they can be removed using the side effects flag. So let's take a look at this graphic and imagine this scenario that a lot of people, I think especially in enterprise scale development, are very familiar with. Imagine we are a team, we are on our sprint, and we have this page or view perhaps of a single page application with many components on it and services and stuff behind it. And only a few entities will be worked on in the sprint. Maybe number one in the picture is a new feature, and number two is, something that needs the JavaScript extended, and number three needs some additional configurations coming from the backend. Typically, how we do this, if we are working on Git flow, is we will branch out from the default branch, be it develop or main or whatever you call it. And very likely, if it's a large project and we will have teams assigned to each one of the features, probably pairs of frontends and backends or even larger teams. And then we will very likely open a release branch from the default when all is merged in, and deploy it to the several environments, testing, UAT, etc., and finally to production. The problem with this dynamic from a technical perspective is that, and even from a business perspective, is that every release triggers a new version of the whole system. So the whole monolith gets a new version, gets upgraded, and needs to be rebuilt and needs to be redeployed, right? So now we know, and we can think about this, it is easy to understand that one of the issues that teams were trying to find a solution for when breaking apart the code was the need for independent release cycles for features. They needed to find a way to deploy independently and prevent a version upgrade for the whole system. We have a feature connected to a business domain, and this feature is being constantly maintained, as opposed to another one that is hardly ever maintained or further developed even. But then again, when we release our dynamic capability, we have to release both and everything else, like the whole code base. So somebody said, let's take modularization to the next level. And that was the birth of the microservices architecture. Just like monoliths, it has pros and it has cons, but it really enables teams and deployability independence. So now with microservices, we have teams that are dedicated to a feature and they can work on it with total independence. And when they want to release this piece of code, the rest of the system doesn't even need to know about it. But that needs a good team setup, and it needs dedicated processes to make it work. So for a microservices architecture system to work, we should respect these principles. There should be one and only one business domain mapping to a business area. There should be an independent team owning the feature and making their own architecture, tech stack, and processes choices. And there should be no shared logic, right? A small part should be able to fail safely and silently and independently from the rest. And basically, when the backend is decoupled, the most organic solution for the front end, I think, is to also accompany this split, right? And this is when it makes sense to have a microservices / microfrontends architecture. So let's focus on the front end for now. For composition, we will need some sort of container to integrate all the microfrontends. And what kind of container that is, that will very much depend on the pattern or technique we use. So it will very much depend on how our microfrontends, coexist in a platform. If they are loaded in one single page, we probably will need something like a host or app shell to load them. We can think of this as the host or the runtime that will expose shared and vendor dependencies and assets, as well as APIs that are necessary for communication and state management between parts. Then it becomes evident, right, that apart from having a team that is in charge of each microfrontend, we will need a team that is in charge of this host or container. And they should be in charge also of all the common assets that it exposes and making sure that everything integrates seamlessly. That is called orchestration, and we will talk about it later in a little bit. So now microfrontends can be implemented in different ways. And I think the key differentiator is the level of encapsulation that we need. When the level of encapsulation that we required is very high, integration is safer, right? Because we know that code won't be colliding and won't be causing bugs everywhere. And from a security standpoint, it's also better, but it's probably a lot less performant because we cannot share anything between components since they are completely encapsulated. For example, if we have an iframe, we cannot use the styles, we cannot use the fonts, we cannot use so many things from the host. And here we can see some of these techniques that are commonly used to implement microfrontends, like hyperlinks, which is like you have a different page or a different view loaded, and you load a new microfrontend entirely, or web components, or I don't know, iframes or ES imports. Each technique provides a different level of encapsulation, and it's a result of a different type of containerization strategy. If we put that into a graphic, this is more or less what it would look like. Nothing that, notice that in the case of web components, Shadow DOM plays a very important role in defining how much or how little encapsulated a container is. And when we're talking about Shadow DOM and we're talking about web components, one thing that we need to consider before making a decision on what strategy we're going to use is the browser support matrix that we have in our project. Because in relation to the performance budget that we have, if we had to support, for example, Internet Explorer 11, we can still use web components and Shadow DOM, obviously, but that would mean that we need to apply or implement polyfills to make things work. And obviously, we're going to have a lot more kilobytes over the wire than if we didn't. So if performance budget is very low, we probably don't want to waste our kilobytes on that. And this is something that should have some weight in our decision. Same for custom elements. Like, do we need them? What is our support matrix? Even for dynamic imports, even for JavaScript modules via script tag. So the big question, what makes for a valid use case? I am not going to talk to you about specific requirements. It could be either you are in a project or you are in a product. We will try to think about more generic definitions applying to our project. If we want to have a more specific overview, I could tell you that I firmly believe that as long as a feature maps to a business stakeholder or as a business unit, and especially in the context of a product, microfrontends may make sense. If you are working in a project, like an enterprise project, a website, having each component as a microfrontend, it's very unlikely to be the right way to go. But here you have some other guidelines you can follow for each one of them. If your case is anywhere in the yellow area, you probably don't need the microfrontends. Like encapsulation in relation to security concerns. The more concerns you have about the code that is coming from another party, and the more encapsulated you want to have your code, well, you should not go with, for example, web components or ES imports or dynamic imports. Maybe the only microfrontend that would make sense in this case is having an iframe. If we're talking about performance in relation to code encapsulation, if you have less budget and you have the need for something less encapsulated, you probably don't want to go with microfrontends. If we're talking about how monolithic a backend is in relation to how frequent your release cycles are, if you don't have microservices in the backend, it wouldn't really make sense to have microfrontends, because we want to have independent teams from one end to the other. So if you are anywhere in the yellow area, you probably do not want to go with microfrontends. There is also how much there is a need for independent deployability for a feature in relation to how independent the team owning the feature is. Like if the team is the same team working in all the features, is not independent, or is very bound to certain technology definitions, and you don't have any need for independent deployability, then probably you're in the yellow area, you don't need microfrontends. There's also how static is the site in relation to how large is the team. If you have a very static site and a very small team, you probably don't need to have microfrontends. And finally, do you want to stick to specific technology? Do you have a strict design guideline to satisfy? Or, I don't know, you probably need to have a very consistent UI, which is, I think, in 100% of the cases, we want to have consistent UI and UX experience. We need to maybe preserve a corporate image, and especially when you don't have a style guide or a documented design system. If the answer is yes, and you don't have good governance, documentation, or a way to coordinate independent teams, you should not go with microfrontends. Now, most of these scenarios that we were discussing right now, all microfrontends were requested and loaded from a single origin. So basically, you still had the chance to integrate them all in your unique build system if you wanted. Like you have separate teams, but they still merge everything, all the code, to the same default branch. And in the end, you can still use these advantages of the unique build system. So you can run static analysis to better manage dependencies and commonalities. But what if a micro application, one of the micro frontends, was not hosted in the same context? What if it was in a different origin? There is this particular case scenario where part of our application is developed maybe by a third party and deployed independently in a completely different domain, but still needs to be highly integrated. We've been doing this for years in enterprise. Like, we just put it in an iframe. And of course, these methods exist for such a long time. It's nothing new. They are still microfrontends in a sense, right? And the downside is that, like we mentioned before, it's so encapsulated, and because it's integrated at runtime, there is no way we can share dependencies. There is no way we can do tree shaking for code. So now there is another tool that we can use to integrate these third-party different origin applications into our microfrontends. And I think this is really the game changer in terms of microfrontends. When you have this particular case scenario and you don't want to use iframe, or yes, it depends, actually using module federation, which is the latest feature for Webpack 5, or one of the latest features released with Webpack 5, will change everything. Because before, we could not have Webpack analyze shared dependencies that it didn't know. Like, Webpack needs to know the whole graph of dependencies before it starts running in order to evaluate what it can tree shape, for example. But now things have changed, and finally we can do this analysis at runtime with totally unknown dependencies or somewhat unknown dependencies, and share them or share some code and share some assets between these remote applications. Let's go back to this example we've seen before. In this example, like, we assume each one of these applications is bundled independently with a certain configuration and hosted on a different origin or domain than the host application, which is the number 0. So module federation assigns roles to runtimes so that we have remote ones and we have a host one, or a host scope, which maps to different Webpack runtimes, and the host is the first runtime to be initialized. And these roles can be totally interchangeable. If you're in a different application and one of the remotes loads first, that's going to be your host. So what really matters is what runtime is initialized first. If we go ahead and want to have module federation for these micro applications, what we should do is we should have a configuration of Webpack module federation plugin on the host side for that time and on the remote side. Let's go ahead and configure the host. So let's start by making sure that we are on Webpack 5, that we need or we have required the plugin. And what is super important here is that we need to give a scope name to our remotes. We can also alias them in the remotes declaration. Just remember that this is a JavaScript variable and it has all the limitations of JavaScript naming conventions, right? So if you see here, over there, remote one is the global name for one of our remotes, so we can access it in window.remote1. We can alias it like that, but the scope name needs to match the one configured in the remote itself. We're going to see that in a moment. We can also declare what dependencies we want to share between the host and the remotes. Now, shared components have a number of advanced options, like it can be a singleton, it can be a certain required version, it can have a strict version, it can have some definitions for share scope. Obviously, the more you configure, the more the chance to fail in sharing if there is no team coordination, right? If you cannot, if you say like, I'm going to be using strictly this version of Angular, and the other team is not coordinated because you cannot even talk to them, they're probably going to use even another framework. So this requires some coordination as well. And this is why the concept of completely independent teams for microfrontends is a little bit of, yes, not very real in practice. Now let's go and configure the remote. The very first important definition is the public path, because otherwise the files will be resolved from the root of the host. If we pay attention to the exposes property, so /module is the public name, and source app remote.module.ts in this case is the internal request. And finally, we see there is a configuration for file name. This is not the actual bundle of the application. This is like a loader script. So it's the bridge between Webpack runtimes. So it's what allows Webpack to understand what is on the other side, on that other origin in that remote module. So this is a representation of how federated modules work. Let's remember again that if you have a remote container and a host, the only difference again is, or what makes one the host and another one not, is which one loads first. And these roles again are interchangeable. And the short scope is basically the object where the provided modules are available at with their definitions. All containers run a version check, as you can see, before loading from the share scope. So if I need, I don't know, Angular, and it may be in the share scope, I am going to check its version first. Every module is also going to validate parameters like strict version, singleton, etc. And if a shared module is in the shared scope coming from the host or the initial runtime, and versions and other parameters are matching or satisfied, it will be the use one. So the remote won't require some dependencies. However, if they are not available in the shared scope, then it's going to fall back to require what is in their own definitions. Once you expose your module, you can now dynamically load it to your application like you load any internal module, usually when you work with frameworks. For example, if we are coding in React and we want to load the expose module that we have just exposed in our remote one into another application, we lazy load it and we can use the suspense mechanism in the template and then have it rendered. In Angular, we could import it to the module or routes like any other lazy loaded module from within the application, and same with Vue. So we can see that it's pretty straightforward once you have completed all the configurations. There are those some more complex use cases that would perhaps require a custom loader even for frameworks, but in general, it works like any regular internal module that you want to lazy load. Then if you want to do this in a vanilla JavaScript application, you obviously are going to need a custom loader to initialize every remote. And we will see that in the demo. So what we also probably want to do when it comes to remotes is to enable a mechanism to either manually register or dynamically discover remotes, because obviously it's unthinkable that if we are working in the context of a very, very large application, we want to go and update the Webpack configuration manually and then have to release that application. That wouldn't make sense either. That would, again, trigger a new version for the whole system. So all these things we need to keep in mind to do it in a dynamic way. And we can also have an API to not only for discovery, but also for registration. It could be, I don't know, maybe you have a form for external teams to go and register their modules, or you just run a discovery for everything that may be new in the system. So this is great, right? So many opportunities with microfrontends and particularly with module federation. However, please also remember the most important thing, that we don't bring innovation for the pleasure of the developers only. The most important thing is that the user experience is great and that we preserve it no matter where from and how the front end is composed. And the biggest challenge when we use this architecture pattern is to ensure that the UI is consistent, that the UI is accessible, that the UI is performant, right? So the only way to guarantee that is to put the necessary effort in orchestration. And by orchestration, I mean routing handling, I mean consistent styles and behavior, I mean thinking how we will sync browser history, how we will manage state from a unique source of truth, and also how we will enable communication between all these micro parts so they behave as a single block, right? Because we don't want anybody to notice these are microfrontends. We want them to think it's just a UI and everything is synchronized. The idea of having then independent teams deciding their own stack is super appealing, and also that they can deploy on their own schedules and, you know, make all their decisions, run all their processes on their own. There is also no vendor lockdown. If you can decide on your own framework, there is no migrating a whole monolith. If a framework gets obsolete, like you can, still keep parts that are more modern, etc. But you have to make sure that the problems you're solving are not smaller than the problems you are introducing or creating, because every layer of abstraction you combine makes it more difficult to achieve great results. We know, for example, every framework has a different flavor for state management, for example. And when we are building a very dynamic application, state management is really necessary. One mechanism we could use to simplify communication between components and even have, some very simple state handling is an event-based publication and subscription bus, leveraging client-side methods. For example, we can publish an event, the component subscribes, and then it does something and perhaps stores something that represents state to other components that are also listening to these events going on. There are also many lightweight libraries that help you with this, or you can also go ahead and dispatch events using window.postMessage and adding event listeners for the broadcasting that is going on. And before we go into the demo, I want to stress how important it is to use APIs or an API first pattern to achieve a good and seamless composition, and also to reduce the amount of code the host or shell team need to produce and maintain. It is always very useful to know what the browser gives you, what is out there in the browser by default. And browsers right now are on very, very heavy and dynamic development. So you should keep an eye on everything that comes out, and especially everything that is out and it's adopted by other browsers. So for example, one very useful, like we mentioned, is the window API, postmessage that we just mentioned, the mutation observer interface that allows us to observe and react to changes in the document object model, the channel messaging method that enables a two-way communication between browsing context, and by browsing context, I mean tabs, I mean windows, I mean iframes, I mean web workers as well. The WebSockets, that is a bidirectional communication technology that enables you to send messages to a server, for example, and receive event-driven responses without having to pull the server. So you don't need a reload, right? And those responses can be sent to another part of your application. So you can use it as a way to connect different microfrontends and the backend. And also service workers that are especially useful to run background processing, including hooks to enable offline bootstrapping of applications. So now for the demo, we have this vanilla JavaScript application acting as the host, and it has a couple of external microfrontends. One is a federated module, and it's also a web component. And the other one is a micro application loading in an iframe. And all of those are very valid mechanisms for integrating microfrontends. The prerequisites to make this setup work is obviously we need to be on Webpack 5 everywhere. We need Node 12 or above. And for Angular applications, because all those are Angular applications, by the way, you need to be on Angular 11. Just notice that Webpack 5 is optional to the Angular CLI because it was released not long ago, and there should be a period of grace, for all the maintainers to keep up and to catch up. And I am also installing dependencies for the Angular 5 applications, Angular 11, applications that use Webpack 5. Sorry for the confusion. With Yarn, because it allows us to force resolution of dependencies to Webpack 5. And I am also using Manfred Steyer's custom builder for Angular, so we can give support to module federation plugin with the CLI builds with the Webpack configurations under the hood. So yes, let's. I'm going to stop sharing right now the the slides. Give me a moment to do that. And I'm going to go now to the other desktop. I think it's visible. Sherry, if not, please let me know. And basically, this is a very, very simple example, obviously. And what I want to make a point on is that I have this, let's go here. I have this micro frontend, like I said, it's an Angular element. It's compiled as a standalone web component. So it has all the Angular framework and everything on it. And can you notice that here, like, for example, the title is not styled and it has a button that does nothing and it's running on port 4202. And over here, I have this application that is, loading all these kittens from a GraphQL or via GraphQL API from some backend database. And it's running on 4202. And then I have this JavaScript application, JavaScript, but just an HTML page. And let's inspect it over here. And what I can see is that I have this, let me go to the iframe. So I have an iframe here where I'm bringing this localhost 4202 that is over there. And I am also over here integrating this Angular element, this web component, that its source is the localhost 4202. So this one, okay. Remote entry JS. So if I go, let's go to the network. If I go to the network and reload, I see that I'm loading the JavaScript for this whole application. And then the next thing I'm loading is this remote entry. And if we go over here, like I said, it's not really the application. It's just a function that gives me or bootstraps this remote scope so it can have an understanding of what are the share scope, what are the share dependencies, what is this application all about. And then when I run it, if it finds anything that is shared and that it can, provide from the host, it will do it. And if not, it's going to be requiring all its own dependencies. So basically, what is going to happen here is we're going to load the iframe over here. We're going to load the web component over here. And this web component is just going to send or post a message to the parent window and say, scroll the other application. And I don't know, I have over here also in the network. Let's do it again. The console over here. I can see that I am sending a message. This other, the parent window is subscribing to that message. It's passing the event down to the iframe, and then more kittens are being loaded. And with that, I am already improving the performance of the whole application while I am creating a UI that is really consistent and nobody really knows that, there are 3 different applications going on. Of course, like I mentioned before, I had to write my own loader to make this work. And in the case of the Angular component is over here, it's listening to this window message event, which maps to a topic, so we can understand messages coming from other regions of the application. And this is it, because I think I'm out of time, and then nobody is going to have time for questions. So I'm going to wait for Sherry and Rasmus to come back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natalia. This was an amazing and insightful actually session. I learned a lot from you, and
Thank
it's
you very
totally
much.
obvious that you are speaking of your experience, and that's very amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Everything I'm talking about usually in conferences, it's 100% real life experiences. So it comes from the practice. Yeah, maybe I simplify it for better understanding, because we have to assume that not everybody is at the same level. But yes, 100% from experience.
Yeah, this is great. Actually, to be honest, nobody, even though that we mentioned a few times, nobody asked any questions so far from here.
They have it all clear.
Yeah, yes, because you were so good in explaining. I can see actually Jonah in the chat that she said that she's is so good to see that there is another woman in tech and Azure hero here. So that is
Thank you very much.
yes, a shout out to Jonah. Let me see if there are people actually clapping for you, because they are very much happy with your talk, and I totally agree with everyone.
Thank you very much. And yes, I am very focused on micro frontends this year. So you can follow me, or you can contact me on any questions in the future. There's going to be a lot more to discover together and learn from each other about this topic.
Yeah, and for those of you, if you haven't already noticed, Natalia is actually creating a lot of content. And the reason that I asked her to join here, because I read an article that she wrote about this topic, and I found it that very insightful. So it was on Dev2, that's true?
Yeah, it's on that too.
Yeah, so go and check her Dev2 account. We are also going to send like a follow-up email to with all the links, and also the kind of that her account on Dev2. And I would say that just follow her on Twitter, because she's
Yeah,
posting everything there.
and also, actually, I haven't pushed this to GitHub because I have to clean it up a bit. It's not production material or anything, but I'm going to post the loader. I'm going to post this whole example and explain how you can run all the servers. And then, because I think that for some people, and that's true for me as well, when you see an example working, then you get the chance to, reverse engineer it and better understand what's going on, and that's a lot simpler. Yeah.
We actually have one question from Jacob just came in. So did you mention Angular libraries to simplify the communication between MFs?
That's, for example, one way you can go if you are using Angular, but libraries can be you can be on complete vanilla JavaScript, and then you can publish a library. That means you publish a certain piece of code that you use commonly on npm, for example, and then you can declare it as a developer dependency in your package .json, and that becomes a library for you, and then you can reutilize this code in several different projects, right? So with Angular libraries, yes, you can use even monorepos. You can move your common code to the library, and you can either publish it or you can consume it directly. In fact, if you take a look at this is a Lerna monorepo, by the way. So I have this host over here, and I have the the micro frontends, the micro apps over here. So this cats app is actually this application over here. So it's basically the same concept, but it's not using Angular entirely because it's just a Lerna monorepo, but Angular monorepos work exactly in the same way. So yes.
Great. That's an answer for Jacob. We have one more question actually coming in from Michael. So any thoughts on how to share NDRX states and actions?
This is one of the very complex topics, and to be honest, I'd like to, this is my personal opinion, right? Move away from, like, when you are working with microfrontends in the most pure form of them, and you're combining technologies, try to move away from these very complex solutions and go to the most simple possible approach. And this is why I recommend you have a simple store that you can, there are several online that maybe I'll recommend in a different post. Because if you in the future want to open the door for new technologies to come into your micro frontends environment or ecosystem, you're going to have a very hard time to have a React application read the state from that NGRX store, right? So keep that in mind, right?
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah, we also have Kai also mentioned that, this is a nice presentation. And also we have a shout out from Michaela as well, and from Jonah as well.
And Tristan is also, when there's no questions, but then he also says a lot of good advice. So a lot of shout outs and very good session, Natalia. Amazing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm super honored to be here, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I want to quickly, because we are running out of time, I want to quickly, actually, if my computer doesn't crash, let me bring up the session. Sorry. Yeah, it kind of did crash.
So just while you're finding that, I can just say that we would really like feedback from all of you, and both for this specific session, but also for Dev Show in general, and also now that we have more than one community gathered here, it would also be good to know what you want to hear, so we can maybe have a collective Dev Show with more communities in the future as well, joining into the same talks. So Sherry will shortly share a QR code for the form that you can put in your feedback into, but you can also put it into the chat. Find us on Twitter or any other area or places that you can find us. Give us your feedback, and so we can improve the show even more.
Yes, this is the QR code that Rasmus was mentioning to have our feedback, and even you can have a feedback for Natalia as well. We will share all the feedback with her. And the previous one that I shared was to get your Azure Heroes badge. So for all of you that you listened actually to join this talk, you can scan this QR code and get your Azure Heroes Winter Learner, which might be very useful in this cold day. And as Natalia actually said, that she is an inclusive leader, which means that you can actually get Azure Heroes in different categories. And all you can do is that go to this URL and then nominate yourself or a community friend for different categories. We really recommend you to go ahead and then check it out. Feedback form, Vibinder?
And next week, we're going to have Michael, which is a senior application architect at Ørsted in Denmark. He's going to talk about RepoDB, hybrid ORM, and library for .NET. So a lot of more dev-related and open source topics there. So look forward to see you next Tuesday as well at the same time.
And tomorrow, for those of you that you're interested in Power Apps, workshop, we have this workshop, and you still can register. Registration is still open, and hopefully we see you there tomorrow. And Maker Show. So if you're interested in IoT and AI, Sarah is going to have this session on 24th. And I really recommend you to join, because that's going to be an awesome session to show how you can actually save elephants. Based on a real life scenario.
Wow.
And we recently launched a game It was on actually February 11, which is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So this game is teach you about the basic AI management. It's a text-based game and basic API management and Python. And once you finish this game, you can all get this very limited edition of Azure Heroes Space Badger once you complete the whole game. And I really recommend you because this is a very fun game. And meanwhile, the whole mission is that to go to the International Space Station and then save them. And during the game, there will be 5 female scientists from Europe that are going to advise you that how you can actually find these parts and save International Space Station. So go ahead and then check it. And the fun doesn't stop there once you finish the game, because you can get actually these badgers and take it with you to Minecraft. And then you can continue there as well. So go ahead and check it with your family.
Cool.
Yeah. Should I say climate hackathon as well, Rasmus? So, okay.
Yeah, go ahead. You know more about it, right? So just let's get your 5 cents on that.
So the thing is that in March we are running a hackathon focused on the climate. It's going to be a 1-week hackathon, and then the kind of the cool thing about this hackathon is that we are bringing challenges from the nonprofit organization that currently they are actually tackling this issue. So they will bring their issue on board, the challenges on board, and then we will need your help to join forces all together and then solve some of these issues. And even if one of the project at the end, of course it's a hackathon, you will win a prize, but if one of the project at the end is going to solve some of these issues, just imagine what an impact you can make. And in order to actually sharpen your skill to go there, we're also running like a climate 3 weeks of 3 times cloud skills challenge as well, to gain multiple different things, especially about focus on the AI and cognitive services. And you can take those skills with you to the hackathon. And there is a very short video. I will play that one because everything is explained there very nice.
Have you heard about the Climate Hackathon on the 22nd of March? It's a hackathon for you, me, us and the Earth. We will hack the climate for a more sustainable world. To get you ready for the hackathon and to sharpen your skills, we've created a set of 3 cloud skills challenges spanning the next 6 weeks before the event. This first challenge is all about Azure Cognitive Services, and to see whether they can help you in tackling those environmental challenges you'll meet on March 22nd. If you want to find out more, go to microsoft.com/AI Cloud Skill Challenge.
So yeah, so that was about the hackathon, and I guess we are done.
So thanks everybody for joining. As we said, hope to see you again next week and give us your feedback so we can improve the show. Have a great Tuesday evening, afternoon, morning, depending on where you are in the world. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.